The GB News Tavern is open, and joining me on Talking Pints is Rear Admiral Chris Parry. Chris, welcome.
Well, welcome.
Welcome to this very different part of the show.
Nice to see you.
Now, career Navy man, 36 years in the Royal Navy.
No time off for good behaviour.
Was it a boyhood dream to be in the Navy, or how did it happen?
No, it wasn't. I was at Oxford reading history, and I realised I didn't know anything about technology. And I thought, well, what's the best way to get alongside technology, work in a technological sort of environment? And I'd lived in Portsmouth, and the Navy seemed to be the best option. So I joined for 5 years, and they kept on giving me really good reasons to stay. And part of that was every day of my 36 years, I got up and said, yippee, I'm going to work today.
Really?
Absolutely.
Never got disillusioned?
Well, towards the end, yeah. The higher you go up these hierarchies, you find people listen to you less and less.
So the Rear Admiral that no one listens to, is that what you're saying?
Well, no, I mean, Nigel, I'm in strategic forecasting, and dare I say it, I get a lot of it right. And when I was doing it for the Ministry of Defence, I was saying, look, this is what's going to happen in a few years' time. This is what's going to happen in 15 years' time. You're going to see the return of Russia. You're going to see the rise of China. Not interested. Short-termism is prevalent in all government departments, unfortunately. It's related to the electoral cycle. One of the things that I'm quite interested in right now, those who don't have to worry about elections normally are quite good at strategy. With the present exception, of course.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. You see, that's right, isn't it? Because, I mean, clearly, the alternative to democracy is pretty unpalatable. But the problem with democracy is that, yes, it's about getting re-elected.
Well, it's Churchill, isn't it? You know, democracy is not great, but it's better than everything else.
Yeah.
But the fact of life is...
But for strategic planning, it's bad, isn't it?
Yeah, but we need to marry somehow the strategic interests of the country alongside our democratic process. And I think we need to take some of the things out of, if you like, everyday electoral politics and say to a Royal Commission, and defence is one of them, energy, education, health, the really important things, and say, look, give it to a Royal Commission or a committee of the Privy Council, tell us what it needs to be for the next 25 years, and that should provide strategic guidance to our legislators, and they implement it and take it forward. But in the modern world, with all its sort of integration, all its complexity, we need to have a strategic process.
Then when you've got, the Navy that you were in, and we'd been through a very long period of peace. I mean, the Navy really hadn't been tested in battle conditions, and suddenly the Falklands War comes upon us. I mean, did we discover that the kit we had wasn't quite as good as we thought?
You never go to war with the kit that you want. You have to improvise. You have to do all sorts of things. The big problem with the Falklands was, of course, we went up against an opponent we weren't expecting to fight. So we were geared against Russian capabilities, essentially high-flying, missile-armed aircraft. And, of course, in the Falklands, we had to face low-flying, sea-skimming Exocets, which we thought were going to be on our side.
Well, they were manufactured by a so-called ally, weren't they?
Well, indeed they were, yes.
Just remind the audience who that was.
Well, of course, they speak French, don't they? But the fact of life is that we made a mistake in the Falklands, and that was we were more afraid of Exocets than we should have been. No ship in the Falklands that fired decoys was actually hit by an Exocet. And we failed to notice that at the time, and we could have stood in the breach against them. Happily, they didn't have that many missiles. We managed to cut off the supply. But, it was a tough little war. It was fought a long way away in very extreme weather conditions. You learn a lot about yourself, and it's good to do that. But you should never wish yourself in a war.
No, sure. But we'll come back to that point about what we were prepared for, and we found something different. And rugby, Chris, big rugby man.
Yep, rugby union.
Yep.
Love my rugby union.
Yep.
Love Wales. Love the Welsh rugby union. And I also support rugby league on the side as well, because my sailors and Marines used to play rugby league, and they're great. And
Forces rugby, pretty competitive stuff, I would think.
Very competitive, particularly between the Army and the Navy. And the rule generally is the Army wins at rugby union, the Navy wins at rugby league.
Well, there you are, folks. You never knew that, did you? Now, you make that point. That there we were ready and equipped, and by the way, with a much bigger Royal Navy and bigger services across the board than we had but we'd expected one potential bad outcome. We then had another bad outcome. And a month ago, if we'd sat here a month ago and said, would we be in the Ukraine where we are, we both wouldn't have even known what the other was talking about. So doesn't this prove the point that consistently running down defence the way that governments have, and I mean, just looking at the figures, our total manpower now about half what it was in 1997, it is a mistake, isn't it?
Nigel, it depends what the context is. Right now, I would say the integrated review that came out last year is actually geared Britain absolutely right for the political ambitions that we have in the current context. We don't want to do panzer stuff. We leave that to the people that can do it best and actually need it the most. That's our continental allies. And look at Germany. Germany's realised now it actually has to step up to the plate. It's going to invest 2% of its GDP, which is significantly more than us.
Taken a long time.
Absolutely, and it's taken President Putin to convince them, which is great. But the fact of life is we are global Britain. The physical equivalent of the World Wide Web is the sea. And that's the route between commodities, manufacturers and markets. And history says if you dominate the sea, you're going to actually dominate the trade of the world. It's as simple as that. China knows this, which is why it's building a big navy at the moment. But the fact of life is what we have at the moment is two blocks emerging. And I talked to you about this a year ago.
I remember.
OK, you've got the Eurasian autocracies, China, Russia and Iran. And what they're seeking to do is dominate the Eurasian continent, including what they call the little promontory called Europe, and also the waters around it. And opposing them, you've got this emerging bloc of the United States, Canada, UK, parts of Europe, more of them as from yesterday, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and India. And what it's going to be now is a fight for the loyalty of all those elites in countries that aren't in those two blocs. Now, we've just lost Afghanistan to the Eurasian autocrats, effectively. Ukraine could be the next one. Are we going to lose Ukraine to the Eurasian autocrats? Well, that's what we're trying to determine at the moment. But can I say that the problem is, and having been in defence policy myself, if you spend too much on defence, the public gets pretty cheesed off and frustrated. If you spend too little, then you're not credible.
So what are we spending at the moment? I mean, we claim to be spending the 2%. Are we really?
Well, it's about...
Don't we add all the ceremonial stuff in?
It's about creative accounting, of course. The fact of life is, we spend about 40 billion a year compared to the Americans, let's work it out in pounds, 568 billion. Which is why they get cheesed off with the way Europe sort of reacts. Well,
I mean, wasn't Trump right about that? Wasn't Trump right to go to NATO and say, what's this new building for? Who are all these people? Why aren't people paying 2%? Why is America?
Well, because Europe had become dependent on the United States, been so used to the United States. The way in the past it's worked is the United States has always said, we're going to be the sheriff. And if we have a problem, we'll create a posse and we'll hand out the deputy badges. We call it a coalition, and we go away and do it. That's the past. What the United States is subtly saying now is, you people in Europe and Asia, you've got to look after your own security interests. But if it gets too big, like with North Korea and nuclears, or with Russia, the cavalry will come. But only if you help yourselves.
Which was very much the Trump line, and I have to say it made quite a lot of sense.
Still makes sense to the United States. But the fact of life is, Nigel, is you gear your capability to the context that you're anticipating. Is the UK geared to go and deter Russia in Ukraine? No, it isn't. Because actually, Ukraine means more to Putin than it does to the United Kingdom.
Well, ultimately, Ukraine means more to the Ukrainians by the looks of it.
Absolutely, and so it should.
And isn't it fascinating to see these young men volunteering, the women and children being encouraged to go to safety?
That was us once.
Yeah, I did wonder about that. I did wonder about, maybe these people have got a bit more spirit in them than maybe we have today. I don't know. We've not been faced with that kind of crisis, so we can't judge.
Not in our generation.
No. I mean, we can't judge how this generation would behave. I like to think we do the right thing, but...
My impression of young people today, Nigel, is for all the stuff you hear about, okay, when it really comes push to shove, they'll do it.
I like to think that.
They will.
as well. You know, I really, really do. So, Chris, Putin goes in, he masses the troops around Ukraine. I wasn't in the least bit surprised with the move into the two eastern provinces. That I kind of expected that he might do that, but I didn't see the rest of it happening at all. And now, where's this going?
Well, originally, I was telling everybody who wanted to hear that I thought the plan was to essentially fix Ukrainian forces in position, probably to put pressure on Kiev and Kharkiv. But his agenda really is to cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea. And so initially what he wants to do, as you say, is absorb Donbass and Luhansk, create a land bridge to Crimea because it's causing all sorts of problems.
That's the little bit that he needs, isn't it? Yeah.
And also, if that was successful, then take the rest of the country across to Odessa, which cuts, as I said, Ukraine off from the Black Sea. I still believe that's his agenda.
Do you?
Yes, I do. And at the moment, coupled with decapitating the government as well, and to do that, he has to take Kharkiv and also Kiev. That's still, I think, the agenda, to tell you the truth.
So this could be a very bloody conflict.
Yes, it could. And I think we've got to be very careful about the way we assess Russian capability. They've committed about 2/3 of their forces. What they have committed is of variable quality. I haven't seen a T-91 tank yet, which is probably one of the best tanks in the world. They're all old models, T-80s, T-72s.
Running out of fuel.
Yeah, but it's a big country. I mean, and, you know, even the troops are of variable quality. Some of them are not very good at all. But what he's doing is probing. And I'm just concerned about the follow-on echelons. I don't know if you've seen the film Zulu.
Of course.
Best war film ever. But in fact, do you remember when the Zulus first turn up, the British soldiers can't understand why they're just standing there and taking shots. Until the South African guy says, look, he's counting your rifles. That's what Putin's doing at the moment. The Russian generals are counting their rifles.
I get this sense, I could be completely wrong, Chris, but I get this sense that rich Russians are not going to put up with this. They don't want Russia to be totally isolated, to be a pariah, to be a sort of almost like a sort of North Korea. You know, they enjoy their super yachts and Chelsea and all those things far, far too much. I think it is quite credible to think that a lot of Russian conscripts do not want to fight their Slavic cousins. I mean, that makes a huge amount of sense to me as well. If we go a week or two down here, and it's pretty much a stalemate, and they're taking big casualties, and support is beginning to melt away within the army, amongst the sort of wealthy Russians, maybe big street protests in Moscow, I mean, is this man so dangerous that he could do something with nuclear warheads?
Not a chance.
No? Go on.
Not a chance. I mean, quite apart from anything else, you know, there are lots of people in that nuclear chain.
Explain.
Well, I think, you know, it depends at what level we think it is. In the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1963, the one thing the Russians learned is you don't delegate control of these, the release of these weapons down to the tactical level. We actually had captains of submarines and ships being able to do nuclear release on their own initiative. That doesn't happen anymore. It's way up the chain. Now, in order to get nuclear release, Putin himself almost would have to press the button because there's quite a few people in the chain. And I don't think...
But the worry is this man now of sound mind?
Well, I think he is of sound mind because I think what's going to happen is that he is probably going to come to the conference table. He's going to go for peace talks and he's going to say, you know what, I'm going to hang on to what I've got now. Because that's what he wanted. He wanted southern Ukraine, he wanted Kiev, he wanted Kharkiv. And if he managed to knock out the government, that is what the agenda was. And of course, if he's able to destroy Ukraine as a functioning country with a non-functioning government, he's got what he wants.
Would he then move on to Estonia?
I think it's a different prospect with the Baltic states. You've got NATO fronting up there. I mean, what we've got to bear in mind is not 1 square metre of NATO territory has been threatened or overflown here. And so it's a different prospect altogether. The West is now thoroughly alerted. And you've got Germany on the warpath again, and you've got every other country saying, look, we've got to spend more on defence. We've actually got to, I mean, what I think has got to happen is they've got to change their attitude. I've been in many European countries, not all, where, frankly, they've been de-Bellicized. They don't get that war happens. you and I belong to a very lucky generation. We've seen a long period of what I call strategic peace, and people haven't got used to the normal way of the world, which is actually the one that we're seeing now, and that is coercive diplomacy backed up by force. And if we think Russia's bad, there's somebody else standing behind Russia, and it's called China.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, finally, you've become a regular contributor here on GB News. How are you finding it?
That's good. I mean, it's refreshing. It's good that people can speak their minds. I think the extent to which people are moderated is perhaps less here on GB News than you'd find elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I think the range of opinion should be encouraged in future.
Chris Parry, thank you for joining me.
Cheers.
On Talking Pints.